Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see everyone here. I want to welcome you. My name is Jennifer Grotsky, and I'm the university's Vice President for Federal Relations. I'm normally in Washington, D.C., but I'm here for a couple of days. So first, thank you for not having any snow. Made it very easy for us to get here. Today's session is sponsored by the Research Office and also Marketing and Communications. And they've invited Federal Relations to come and talk with you all about connecting with policymakers and funding agencies to get your message heard and deliver impact. And so the way we're going to structure today is I'm going to talk for a little bit about Congress and specific communication strategies you might use when you want to talk to policymakers. And then I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Dr. Naomi Weber from Lewis-Burke Associates. Lewis-Burke Associates is a consulting firm we use in Washington, D.C., and Naomi will talk about federal agencies and some strategies you might use there. We think that after that presentation, we're going to have a panel discussion with a few more of the consultants from Lewis-Burke Associates, as well as our distinguished faculty speaker, Dr. Azar Bastavros from the Hariri Institute, who's going to give you real-life examples of connecting with policymakers and funding agencies that have been successful. So why don't we go ahead and get started? And after that, we will have time for questions, and then we'll also just stay up here afterwards if you want to come up and chat with the panel one-on-one afterwards. So the first question you're thinking about is, why would you want to engage with an elected official? And I think it's important to understand why. Some obvious ones would be funding for your scientific discipline, but you also might think about a policy change that would be important for your research, or maybe you just want to share new information, or you want to become a resource for a policymaker. So before you start, you need to think a little bit about Congress and how they are different from a university. Congress has its own culture and its own pace. It's much faster than things operate here at BU. They're in session at different times of year than we are here at BU. Then you also want to think about the fact that Congress doesn't just control money, it also controls policy. So that's another reason to think about it. A member of Congress thinks that knowledge is power, so for them, the more knowledge they have, the more powerful they are. In Washington, D.C., face-to-face interactions really matter, so I think a lot of us are used to doing a lot of emails and phone calls, but face-to-face really does matter in Washington, and repetition is key. So repetition is key. We joke you have to say something at least 7 times for someone to understand it, or when people try to introduce a bill, it can take up to 7 years for the bill to get enacted. Things have to be repeated over and over again. Sometimes when I meet with scientists, they'll say, well, I'm doing a Capitol Hill Day with my scientific society, and here I am, and then I get asked to do it again next year. Do I have to go again? I've done it once. Yes, the answer is yes. Repetition is really key, because if you're not up there, someone else is up there talking to a policymaker instead. So what do members of Congress care about? I think the obvious is the needs of their districts and their states and the local economy, but there are other things that members care about. They care about elevating their own profile on key issues. They want to be known as an expert in a particular area. They care about positive attention from the media. They care about areas that are of personal importance to their family. So some of them are obvious. If they have a family member with a particular disease, they might care about that. Some of them are less obvious. I can think of a member of Congress who's a dedicated surfer, and so he's quite interested in ocean policy, right? And you wouldn't expect that given his voting profile. There's another member of Congress who fancies himself a sort of amateur astronomer. He's really interested in space. You wouldn't necessarily know that, right? So he's made it his business to help NASA. So it helps to know personal information about members of Congress. And then, of course, bottom line, members of Congress are interested in being reelected. They would like to continue being members of Congress. So to reach them, anecdotes, accurate data, and local stories conveyed in non-technical language are useful for policymakers. So how are you going to prepare? First thing is you want to review the member of Congress's website. These are some examples of items you can find on the site. Biographies, political affiliations, nowadays social media posts, but also what committee assignments they're on, what legislation they've had introduced. And then you need to decide, what is it you're going to ask the member of Congress to do? You're not there just to chat, right? Anytime you're there to ask them something. You need to figure out what that's going to be. And as you're doing this research, in addition to going to their website, you can look at congress.gov, and there you can find relevant legislation and hearings. So here are the rules of the road, and I'm going to repeat these throughout the presentation. But these, I think, are the really key takeaways I would like you to have for today. The first is be brief. I think here at a university setting, we are not rewarded for brevity, right? We are rewarded for length. So a more in-depth research, the better. That's not the case on Capitol Hill. Most members of Congress or congressional staff would like something that's less than 1 page long. 1 paragraph is even better. And so that's kind of difficult sometimes for those of us who spend our whole careers, focused on something, and then we have a very long treatise about it to get it down into 1 paragraph or 1 page. That's where our office, Federal Relations, can be helpful, or you can practice. Think about when you talk to someone in your family who knows nothing about your work and how you explain it in a very brief way. Be brief. Be polite. It has been striking to me that not everyone is polite when talking to a member of Congress, and I'm not sure if that's just because maybe what we see on television is sort of, you think that if you're heated, it gets more attention, or people think social media is not the same as face-to-face interaction and they're impolite over social media. It just doesn't work. So be polite is extremely, extremely important. Listen. You're not just there to present your own point of view. You actually want to hear back what the other person has to say and respond to that and really absorb that. So listening is important. Meeting congressional staff is really key. It's very rare, actually, to meet with a member of Congress, and that's okay. They have congressional staff whose job it is to inform them, to analyze information, to meet with constituents like you and I, and then to report back to the member of Congress. Staff are extremely important. And sometimes you'll meet with a staff person who is extremely junior. They've just started, and you're thinking, why am I meeting with this person? But 9 months, 10 months, 12 months later, they actually might be much more senior in that office. The turnover is very quick in a congressional office. So the more you can meet the staff, the better off you'll be. You can have direct access. Say thank you. We talk about this a lot in our office. We lead every meeting with a thank you. Whether or not it's deserved, we lead every meeting with a thank you. No matter what, they've taken the time to meet with you, to listen to your point of view, to read your document, so we always say thank you. And like anyone, members of Congress and their staff want to be appreciated, so you can never say thank you too many times. It's always good to leave something behind. A 1-page document is good, a folder of materials. Your business card is good. I've started to get the sense that business cards are falling out of favor here at the university. They have not fallen out of favor yet in Washington, D.C. So please always have a business card when you're going to meet with a member of Congress or their staff. And then stay in touch. As I said before, it's not enough to do 1 meeting, to talk to someone 1 time, or to write 1 letter, or to post 1 thing on social media. Repetition is key, and staying in touch is important. So what are your options? I'm going to talk about a few of them in order of sort of easiest to most difficult. Social media, letters, emails, and phone calls, attending a town hall meeting, in person, and using the press or media. So social media, for members of Congress, Twitter and Facebook are pretty much where they're at. A few have gotten into Instagram, but really it's Twitter and Facebook for them. And it's important for them. It's a new way for them to reach out to their constituents and to hear back from them. And again, to get praise. I think that's important to them as well. Some quick tips for you, things I've noticed. When you want to tweet at or about a member of Congress, recognize that many of them have separate accounts for their official government business versus their campaign. And for most of what you want to do, you want to talk to people on official government business. Typically, if it's an official account, if you look at their Twitter bio, it will say the official account of so-and-so, or their Twitter handle might begin with rep or sen. That's usually a good indication. A campaign account often goes dormant for a couple of months or years while they're not in the campaign cycle. Find a good hashtag. Make sure you're part of a larger conversation, and that's what a hashtag would do for you on Twitter, so that you can be connected to a larger world of people talking about a particular issue. Or, for example, in Massachusetts, there's the hashtag MAPOLI, M-A-P-O-L-I. People who are talking about Massachusetts politics will often tag their tweets. I don't even know how they pronounce it. MAPOLI. And so they know that it'll be read by a larger group of people who are interested in that issue. Remember the difference between replying and posting. This is really more about Twitter. If you begin a tweet just with someone's Twitter handle, you will reply directly to that member of Congress, but no one else can see your tweet. And so I have seen this sometime when people intend to praise a member of Congress and they start with their Twitter handle, but only that member of Congress can see it because they just began with the @ sign. So put a period in front of it or put a space in front of it so that more people can see your tweet. And share. Remember, Twitter, it's not just, or Facebook, it's not just a few sentences. You can share content. You can share an article you've written or an op-ed you've written. Or if you share something that the member of Congress themselves has written, they really appreciate that. So if you amplify their message, they'll remember, hey, this is someone who is supporting me. So I have a couple of examples here. This is a bad one first. So what they've done here is they've used Mr. Capuano's campaign account. So now it's only going to his non-official government business. They've started with his handle, @mycapuano, which means only he can see it, nobody else can see it. And they were rude. Why don't you care about science? And they were not very specific. So that's not a great tweet. So the second one is a good one. They're thanking him, because you can never thank someone too much. They use his official government Twitter handle, and they're specific because it talks about NSF. And then a better option at the end, even more thank yous and some hashtags. NSF funded is one that the National Science Foundation likes to use to draw attention to their work. Cape Cod lets people know on the Cape that you're part of that community and could be found by those people as well. And now Mike Capuano knows that more people are going to hear about his work. My little emojis at the bottom, so be polite, say thank you. So other options, letters, emails, and calls. These are good for requesting immediate action. Many times your scientific societies will ask you to do this. They'll send out an alert saying, please call your congressperson or please send an email to your member of Congress about a specific issue. You can find contact information at house.gov or senate.gov. And you can also use a template from your scientific society. They often have on their websites pre-written letters that you can hit, modify yourself and hit send. Or if you'd like help with drafting something, again, the Federal Relations Office is here to help. Brevity is important. Polite is also important, as is thank you. Town hall meetings. These are actually pretty popular in Massachusetts. A good number of our members of Congress hold town hall meetings. That's not the case in every state. People who are in election cycle hold town hall meetings. So, for example, Senator Warren has been holding a lot over the last few months and will continue to do so. If you would like to find out about a town hall meeting, check the elected officials' website or sign up for their newsletter, and you'll get alerted to it. Virtual town halls are also quite popular with members of Congress. These are telephone town halls, or sometimes now they'll do webinar-based town halls, and you listen in, and then you can ask questions on the phone call. These are good because they can put a face with a name. It gives you an opportunity to say thank you. So, for example, we have a program in our School of Public Health where the faculty member is specifically going to try to attend town hall meetings of a couple of members of Congress who were helpful to that particular program, just so she can say thank you in a public venue to that member of Congress. And that's another way to get the word out about what they've done, and it'll remind that member of Congress, hey, our public health training centers, they really appreciate what I've done. I want to help them again in the future. So now we'll talk about in-person. I'm going to jump back. Town hall meetings. 2 other items in my little emoji I forgot. The picture of the staff. At a town hall meeting, most members of Congress will have several staffers there. Since it's unlikely you're going to get to talk directly to the member of Congress, or maybe you won't get to ask your question, introduce yourself to the staff on the way in or the way out and give them a business card. And that way they'll know to keep in touch with you. Ask if you can speak with them in the future. That will be very important as well. Be nice to the staff. Sometimes the town hall meetings, what they'll do is they'll have you write your question on a piece of paper and then they'll pick out the questions in advance. So if you're nice and memorable, perhaps they will pick out your question as well. Now we go to in-person meetings. In-person meetings can take place in Washington, D.C. or here at a congressional district office. Most likely you will be meeting with congressional staff rather than a member of Congress, and that's okay. Staff are very knowledgeable. Their job is to pass along the information to the member of Congress. The first thing you would do is send an email to the scheduler for that congressional office asking for a meeting with the person on a specific date on a specific topic. Sometimes it takes a while to hear back, and you would follow up with a phone call, always being polite, always being brief. Our office, again, Federal Relations, is always happy to help you if it's an issue that's of importance to Boston University. If you do have the opportunity to have a meeting, Always begin every meeting by thanking the member of Congress or the staffer for taking the time to meet, and quickly introduce yourself and explain what you're advocating for. Remember to stick to your message and articulate your requests, so repetition is key. You want to repeat a few times. Refer to the materials that you're going to leave behind, because you're always going to have a leave behind, remember. And be conversational, because you're always going to listen, so you want to have room for the person to speak to you as well. When the meeting's over, make sure to say thank you again. Exchange business cards and contact information. These are a couple of do's and don'ts for congressional meetings. I think I'm going to focus on the don'ts. Don't be discouraged if your meeting contact appears young. It's actually one of the sort of odd things you'll see in Washington, D.C. Most congressional staff that you meet with will be between the ages of 25 and 32. Right, so it'll be very odd that you'll be here at Boston University perhaps teaching a class with someone, and then you see someone that you're taking a meeting with on Capitol Hill who looks to be the same age. These folks have a lot of influence, and they have a lot of knowledge about the congressional process. What they don't know is what you want to share with them, right? So they want to learn from you, and then they can teach you a couple of things about Congress. Don't be surprised if you're asked to meet in an unusual location. Congressional offices are really tiny. It's not at all like you see on TV. They're tiny, there's no room, and there's too many people talking at one time. So sometimes staff will ask you if you'll meet with them in the hallway or a cafeteria or a very cramped conference room. And it feels like they're trying to blow you off or they don't respect your time, but it's actually the opposite. They're trying to find a good space to meet with you and they just don't have one. So don't be surprised about that. Do not bring any gifts or sealed envelopes. There are some pretty serious congressional ethics rules about what offices can and cannot accept, and the short answer is they cannot accept almost anything. Do not bring a gift. Also, sealed envelopes, because of concerns about bioterrorism, many offices don't like anything sealed coming into their office. So everything's open, it's folders, it's paper, it's nothing of value. So after your meeting, you want to promptly turn around and send your contact information, any information they requested. You want to stay in touch and you want to keep on top of what they've been doing. So sign up for newsletters, find out what that member of Congress is up to, so that when they do take action that you like, you can say thank you, or you can remind them about action that you've asked them to take. Finally, be prepared after any meeting or in any meeting for an elevator pitch. So sometimes what will happen is you'll ask for a meeting with a member of Congress, they'll refer you to a staff member, but on the way out the door, the member of Congress walks in the office, or you run into them in the hallway, or you run into them in the grocery store. Always think about the fact that you might have a 30-second opportunity to meet with someone, and what would you say if you had an unexpected chance to meet with someone? And you would be brief, and you'd be polite, and you would thank them. So always think about your 30-second opportunity. And my final slide is about media. This is sort of a go big option. If you remember that members of Congress are influenced by the media, they want to have praise in the media, they want recognition in the media, you might think, gosh, I would like to do something along those lines. My first recommendation would be to work with marketing and communications here at BU, the folks who are putting on this event. They have wonderful resources there, and they can talk to you about a variety of things. They can talk to you about social media, they can talk to you about op-eds, and they would be a really good resource for you. Another option is your own scientific society. You might even be asked, would you lend your name to this letter? Would you lend your name to this op-ed? Or they might work with you. If you say, I have something I'd like to say, they might want to be supportive of you and help you write something. Op-eds are a possibility. Writing letters to the editor are another possibility. I'm working with someone at BU right now on a letter writing campaign to the editor to say thank you. Remember, thank yous are everywhere. To say thank you for increasing the NIH budget, and we're targeting a variety of different publications for key members of Congress. Paying for an advertisement, this is more likely something that, again, a scientific society or group of people would do, but an ad that runs on the radio or something in a publication, even online, I think people are they like to see. Remember to share. So if you do get an op-ed published, it's not enough just to have it in print somewhere. It's only worthwhile, really, if you're sharing it with people. Are you posting on Facebook? Are you sharing it with your neighbors? Are you sending it in the mail to people to remind them about it? You need to really share it as widely as possible so it has a longer shelf life. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Naomi, and she's going to talk about federal agencies.
Well, I better start with thanking Jennifer for that wonderful presentation. And thank you all for being here today and giving us this opportunity to speak to you all. Okay, so as Jennifer said, I'm from Lewis-Burke, and there's 4 of us here today. We are the government relations and consulting firm from Washington, D.C. that work very closely with BU Federal Relations. There's 4 of us today, as I said, but we have a team of about 30 people back in Washington. And we help Jennifer with covering all the different agencies. We provide intelligence, information, help faculty, staff, anyone at the university with any issue that they're interested in related to higher education in the federal government. So we've been working with BU for 5 years, no, what year are we in? 6 years now, and loving every minute of it. So thank you, Jennifer. So I'm going to talk very briefly and concisely about types of agency engagement that you might find yourself getting involved with. And the idea of these is to help you build those relationships with agency staff to put you in a better position for future funding opportunities or to help shape future funding opportunities. So I'll talk briefly about meeting with agency staff, responding to requests for information, attending workshops, participating in federal advisory committees, and convening events. Okay, so meeting with program officers. This is very similar to meeting with members of Congress, but maybe a little less exciting for everyone. Most program officers really enjoy meeting with faculty and students. You will get the odd one who doesn't want to meet with people, and you really mustn't take that personally. If you do want to reach out to people, we recommend that you make initial contact via email and provide specific information. So, for example, I saw your solicitation with this reference number. I would like to meet with you to talk about my research idea, which is related to this proposal I submitted last year, and give the proposal reference number. You know, as much information so the program officer can be prepared is something they really appreciate. You should do homework before the meeting. You know, program officers get really cross if people come in and have no idea what types of things their program is funded. So if you go in and say, I've got this great idea about something you've never heard of, and they say, well, I funded 10 of those last year, you know, you look unprepared, and that's not going to be a good start to the relationship. We recommend you provide a tailored one-page summary of your research. You know, look at their program, reflect some of the individual program officers. So if you come to Washington and meet with 3 or 4 different program officers, you might want to think about preparing 3 or 4 different one-page summaries. And that's something Lewis-Burke can help you with. We can review those and give you advice. I've seen some that are really good that include a photo and contact information, and that helps the program officer, a small photo, you know, not a one page of yourself. But that just helps the program officer remember your face. So when they're reading your research, they make that connection easier. So, you know, academic community doesn't always dress the same way that policymakers in Washington, D.C. dress. Some program officers, you know, dress in very casually, but we always recommend you go dressed in business attire. A lot of people will come and meet a program officer, and they'll just spend 30 minutes talking about their research and not allow any time for feedback or advice and guidance. So if you're given a 30-minute meeting, plan to talk for 5 to 10 minutes, and then make sure you have questions and allow time for them to respond. Because the program officers want to give you advice. They want you to submit a good proposal that's going to make their job easier. Make sure you take notes. There's nothing worse than being in a meeting and the person's just staring at you and you don't think they're paying any attention to you. Serve as a reviewer for some agencies. That's a really effective way of engaging. And make sure, like Jennifer said, you send those thank you emails and any follow-up straight away. Okay, so requests for information. We circulate a lot of these to universities and encourage people to respond. And we know it's a lot of work, and sometimes people are like, why should I respond? No one's going to listen to my personal views. But these RFIs, you'll be surprised how much the agencies look at them. They'll look at the numbers of responses they get, where those responses come from, what is included specifically in those. And they might call you up and say, hey, I was really interested in your response. Could you come to this workshop? Or could you tell me a bit more about what you were thinking? Can you provide me a one-page summary of what your idea might look like? So you can help influence future solicitations. So, for example, the National Science Foundation at the minute is developing these 10 big ideas for future investment. Those aren't all fully defined, so if there's a request for information about your ideas for those, we recommend submitting proposals. They put out a request for information for mid-scale projects. You know, they could take those responses and say, okay, we got 10 responses from geo, 10 from physics, so let's put all the money 50-50 geo and physics. Where, you know, and if you're a mathematician who didn't respond, there may be no money for your community. So you want to just, you know, mark out your territory. If there's a solicitation coming up, you could help influence what is included and highlight the importance of your specific area without talking about, you don't want to submit your project idea that is already pre-cooked. You want to say how what you're doing could contribute to what the agency is looking for. You can also prevent bad ideas from happening. If you respond to requests for information, you know, this has happened, you know, with National Institutes of Health and limiting principal investigation, PI, the number of proposals they can submit. The community responded so against that idea that NSF dropped that idea. So that, you know, that's one good example. It's a good way, if these comments are made public, you can help use your input to form teams or to start collaborations with other researchers. And it also shows your interest to the agency. So, you know, that if a program officer puts out an RFI and no one responds, they're a little defeated before they begin their new program. So workshop and proposers days. So DARPA, in particular, will put out a brief solicitation and then they will host a proposers day. You know, that's a really good way to go and learn more about what the agency is thinking, to meet other people, to talk about what you could add to the agency activity in that area. You can help shape future activities under those programs, network with other community leaders who are attending that workshop. You can talk about the university strengths. So if you go, you're not just and you get there and you realize you're not the perfect fit. It's always good to be able to talk about what your colleagues are doing. And then once again, that helps build the relationship with these agency staff. Federal Advisory Committee. So a lot of agencies have standing committees that meet regularly. They provide advice and feedback, help shape future directions. You are there to provide advice and guidance from the community. So you're not meant to be there promoting your own personal interests, but more, you know, your broad field and your university priorities. That's a great way to gain intel on early agency thinking. So before the solicitation is released, which is, I think, something everyone wants to know about. Networking, talking with different agency staff. You can meet your program officer on a regular basis. Raising the profile of your institution, you know, feeding that stuff back to the university when you come back. And for this, you know, the things that Jennifer talked about, like being polite, saying thank you, are key. There was a committee being formed in a previous organization I worked with, and we were going through a list of names, and someone was taken off the list because they cut in front of one of my colleagues at a coffee line. So, you know, don't go for the cookies too early. So convening events is for the university to host events, and I know we host a lot of events at Boston University, and I think, you know, you invite all the other Boston universities to come, and I think that's really great. It's great for raising the profile of the research going on here. It's the agencies like these events. If you invite industry or other stakeholders, they can see that you know, industry is supporting the kind of research. That's something a lot of the agencies are very interested in. They can't often build those relationships directly. They need the universities to help with that. These help you develop teams, identify new areas to work in, and obviously a great way to network. And that is the end of our slideshow. Thank you.
We're going to switch over to a quick panel conversation. We actually asked Azur to come and speak because we have all worked with him, both on the congressional side and the federal agency side, and think he's particularly good at communicating with both, actually, and they're sometimes slightly different skill sets. So I wondered if you could speak to us briefly just about your experience, like why you've decided that you wanted to engage with federal agency officials and congressional officials, and maybe if there's something surprising that has happened to you as a result, or a result for your research.
First of all, let me say I really enjoy doing it. So that's the first thing. In other words, I'm not doing this as a chore. I'm not doing this because I have to do it. I'm doing it because I learned a lot from doing it, and I enjoy doing it. So that's the first point I want to make. And the second point is, I really feel originally, even when I was a little maybe more junior, I was thinking, if I talk to somebody, maybe they'll give me a grant. So I sort of realized it doesn't work that way. I'm not there actually to ask for anything. I'm there to be helpful, especially if I feel that my own work, there is something that they should know about. How they use it, not quite clear yet. In a couple of occasions, for example, when I visited Representative Catherine Clark to talk about the privacy-preserving analytics that we were doing, it turns out she was very interested in funding NSF, and that's important for me. So I was going there to thank her for supporting NSF, but also because she was interested in pay equity and she was putting through a bill. So I feel like it's more about telling them what we do and finding the opportunities. I always listen. Sometimes they say things that all of a sudden you can react to at that point. What else? One of the values of doing this also is to understand the context, how these programs come about. So oftentimes when you read on a piece of paper on the website, here's the program, you don't know the sort of the history. And one of the things that I really enjoy working with Lewis-Burke is they give me that context. Like, well, there was this program before, their work had been working on that for a while. So that context helps a lot understand actually where they come from. And I find that to be quite useful. I'll stop here if you have questions. Great. Yeah.
So for the Lewis-Burke panelists, I know that you work with a lot of different universities and faculty members. Can you maybe give us an example or two of a particularly effective strategy you've seen someone employ in a meeting either with a federal agency or a congressional office? And then I'll also ask for the converse. Have you seen a particularly ineffective strategy that you've seen someone use?
I'll start. No, I thought that Azur's point was excellent, that you aren't going into demand or ask for money. And so some effective meetings I've seen with program officers is to come in with folks who come in with a very open mind and talk about what they've been working on and how they think that it fits into this particular program officer's interests, but being ready to then adapt and pivot and be flexible on how their research could really meet the needs of that program officer. And then even if we've been in meetings where then the program officer say, well, it doesn't work here, but actually I know somebody at and I'm going to have NIH examples, another institute, and it may fit into this very specific program that they're putting together. Would you be willing to meet with them? And you should just be, oh, of course I will, and that's, without even if it feels a little uncomfortable at first, at least acknowledge that that's a good idea. And the converse is folks who, and I actually haven't taken in on meetings, but in prepping people for meetings, they said like, well, I just think I should be able to go and then get the money, and we try and talk people out of that, and then even recommend that you not go if that's actually your attitude about it.
And just while we're on the positive, I'll add one thing that people like Azur are so good at is building these long-term relationships. So, he's been working this crowd for a while, and you have really established and strong relationships, and you go, and it's not always with a specific ask. It's to share information and to give your time and energy and to share about the expertise. So it's, almost giving the agency or policymaker a gift, and then, then you can they can just give you the stuff.
And one thing I would like to add, it's one thing to go and just talk about your work. It's another thing to also talk about your community's work. So then all of a sudden they realize, wait a second, this guy is just not talking about this one paper he wrote last week. He's there because he's knowledgeable about what's out there. He's presenting sort of a line of work, and now, if they're going to ask, well, maybe there's 4 or 5 other groups in the U.S. doing it, but they're going to come ask me. And that happened actually when there was the bill for what was it called? The
Evidence-based policymaking?
The Right to Know Before You Go Act.
Yes.
And then I ask, can you write a sort of a statement to add to as a support for the bill? So that was a good example.
Because of Oz's expertise in multi-party computation.
And I would just echo what he said. If you can bring up other groups or describe the passion behind something exciting in your field, that gets the agency official really excited about funding it, and they understand that there's actually 5 or 6 or 7 groups interested in this. And it shows a lot of confidence if you're willing to bring up your competing research groups, if you will, and that you're connected to the field. So that's a particularly effective one. I think the worst I see is when somebody who's clearly not a deep expert in your sub aspect of your field. Maybe they're a program manager who oversees a much broader portfolio. Maybe it's a congressional staff who doesn't have any scientific background, and it kind of descends into an argument because they made a mistake in the way they characterize something. It's one thing to correct or clarify if it's particularly germane. We spend some time. We'll go in and we'll be talking about neutrinos, and somebody will say, "Yeah, it's a really small particle, right?" And then you'll see this faculty member, "Well, it's not really that small. Yes, it's actually super small. And let me describe the size." That is of no relevance really to the purposes for that meeting. That would be germane to a student that you were trying to teach. But don't get drawn into an argument and try to win over on content. I think that kind of defeats the purpose of what you're there to do.
And I think with the great training that Jennifer and Lewis-Burke can help before you go into a meeting, it's often I find myself that the faculty member, I feel angry at how they're being treated, and the faculty member is just calm and just repeating what they're doing. We've had instances where we turn up at an agency and they say, "Well, why have you come here to meet me? Why are you here?" And I'm like, "Well, we confirmed the meeting yesterday," and you just have to, be acknowledging that, okay, well, while we're here, let's just meet and talk very briefly. I just want to, introduce my research and be a resource to you. So it's that relationships and managing personalities is where things can go wrong.
So shifting a little bit, one of the questions that we're getting a lot in our office in federal relations is about the current political climate in Washington, D.C. It feels unprecedented. It feels unusual in a lot of ways, like political norms are different. And so does that make any of this advice different in terms of working with a member of Congress or congressional office or a federal agency even when you go to those meetings? And if so, how? If not, why not?
Probably not from Massachusetts. Okay.
Well, I would just start and say that a lot of folks, especially at the program manager level or folks in the federal agencies who are career, they're non-political, they feel particularly besieged, even if it's not about politics, whether they agree with this administration or not. And obviously, as you might imagine, many have concerns because of the proposed cuts to their agencies. But it's also, they came in to do something impactful, to really make a difference for their field and their community. And the dysfunction that they see both in the White House or in Congress and the inability to get clear direction as to what the future is makes them feel particularly besieged. So the distinction I would make as to the advice from before, maybe till to now, is recognize that they're there out of service. I think a lot of times faculty can be kind of, well, you're not a real expert in the trenches like us doing the work. You're up here sitting at a desk, pushing paper, forgetting that it's a really hard place for them to be in, and they're in a particularly low morale point. And so for you to encourage them, thank them for doing this stint, see if there's ways you can be helpful for some of those, like, RFIs were mentioned, that actually help them get their same job done. That can go a long way toward them feeling that you're on their side. And it has nothing to do with coming out and wearing a D or an R hat of any kind. It's not about politics. It's about the pressures they're under.
And validating. We found that in the months and even continuing, but especially in the months right after when things started to change, was validating their work by even communicating things that the program officers were worried about to the community, right? So they think they're, like you were saying, in this box. So if we can validate, yes, what you're doing is valuable by you be the recipient of the things they're working on, and then reassert to them, validate to them that, yes, I'm still doing this work, and I think that everything you're doing actually is very important to science and to the country, and it just helps be surprised how, I mean, maybe not, they're humans and they want to feel like they're doing good things too, so I found it useful.
This question is for Azur. More about how this work, this aspect of your work about talking to federal agencies and talking to policymakers, how do you feel it's perceived on campus? Is it important to you that deans or other senior administrators at the university know about it? Is it important to you that faculty who work in your center know about it? How is it perceived? Will that change whether or not you want to, to do this kind of activity? Do you get rewarded for it, or does that matter?
I'm not sure. I think there's two sides. I mean, there's always, it's probably a waste of time. I mean, there's some people who think that way, but some others who feel that this puts computer science on display, and that's always good. So in other words, they see this as more even independent of what happens in DC. Here on campus, that this is an opportunity to show off what computer science is doing and why it's important and why it's relevant. I have to say that also the piece that people don't realize is that when we do these things, I go back, tell my program officer of the NSF grant that has allowed me to do this research, to tell them that I actually did talk to X, Y, and Z about that. They really appreciate that. I put that in the broader impacts aspect of my NSF reports. That's very valuable. And I think that helps explain also to my colleagues why this is important, and turns out that it's also a way to recruit them to do it. So in other words, now that they see that somebody's doing it, I'm enjoying it, I'm not really, I didn't come back, with a bloody nose or anything like that, so they would be willing to do it themselves.
And then this is going to be my final question for the panel, and then I'm going to turn it over to folks in the audience. More for the Lewis-Burke folks. What about people who really can't travel to Washington? They're focused on their work here. It's not an opportunity for them to go to DC. What kind of opportunities do they have to communicate? Is it just as effective to talk to a program officer on the phone? What about congressional interactions, bringing people to campus, et cetera?
Well, I'll start with, we've been spending a lot of time talking about fairly open agencies. Like, I know Naomi mentioned DARPA, but a lot of this is oriented around the NSFs and the NIH and the traditional funders of faculty research. I will say that mission agencies, they don't have a mandate in their mind to meet with faculty. Their mandate is to accomplish their mission. Insofar as faculty have an idea that helps them accomplish their mission, obviously they want to chat. But they don't just want to meet to help you, they want to only think about their agenda. So in that sense, actually, you don't really need to travel. It could be for mission agencies. It might be, such as Department of Defense, Department of Energy, NASA, Department of Homeland Security. It might be as simple as, going back to what Naomi was referencing, putting together that concise précis that's tailored to their program of interest. In certain departments, they have their own parlance, like in DoD, Department of Defense, they would talk about it as a quad chart, or answering the hierarchical questions. And if you send that in, it can prompt a call or an email that's far more effective at getting across your point and establishing that relationship than trying to travel down there. Sometimes these agencies are spread all over DC. They might be 2 hours from each other, respectively. So it's a fairly inefficient use of your time in some cases. So I would not be discouraged if you can't get down there. And I also think more program managers, even in the agencies like NSF and NIH, are open to phone calls or Skype calls, because they can take, instead of 30-minute meetings, they can do it at an 18-minute meeting, and they can get the same information communicated without the logistics. I've got to clear you through security and escort you and things like that. So I don't think it's a problem.
And just to add on that last thing that Michael said, there's some program officers who refuse to take in-person meetings because they don't think it's fair to the entire community. It's easier for people from Boston to fly down to DC than people from Utah or, somewhere that doesn't have any direct flights. Nothing against Utah, because they have an airport. But so they're trying to level the playing field. But once again, the things we talked about, like sending that one-pager tailored, contacting via email, asking for a phone call or a video conference, different people have different preferences. They might just want to talk to you via email, and that's fine. You know, you can build relationships in many different ways, but I think the important thing is building that connection and having multiple connections, not just, you know, you don't send one email and then assume you've got the relationship for life. You need to send an email, then follow up, use social media, thank the program officer, you know, just keep maintaining that relationship.
Sorry, just one thing that Naomi prompted. So we have noticed this trend that they don't want to meet because it might favor certain areas or wealthier schools who have travel budgets. But conferences are different. More and more program managers, agency officials are preferring to meet with faculty at conferences. Many of them will even set times where they'll do a series of meetings. So identifying when the major conferences are, where, especially not just what the major conferences are for your research field, but also what are the conferences that are most likely to have a bulk of agencies. You know, we always recommend, for instance, the ARPA-E conference, Department of Energy's Applied Research Projects Agency, even if you're not necessarily a DOE-funded investigator, because ARPA-E attracts Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, and Department of Energy officials to their conference. So it's a great one to go to maybe meet with other agencies who came to kind of hear about that cross-section of interest. So conferences are great, and town halls, Jennifer mentioned earlier, are another great place to see congressional staff or members who might, I've heard many times from congressional offices, trying to get a meeting in DC is a lot harder than trying to get a meeting when we're back in district or back in state. They're more accessible to you all. So yes and no on where you are and what it works, but don't be discouraged if DC, you know, you can't get to DC.
Yeah, I want to add another point, which is they can also come here, and it works with me quite a bit. So I go and I know somebody. I always ask, is there anything I can help with? And sometimes there is. So a perfect example here is I was at NSF, and I was talking about something totally different, and they know that I'm doing some work in smart cities, and says, well, look, you know, there's a new program, and we just want to get input from the community. Would you be interested in running a planning workshop so that we can get feedback? Because we were bringing in some work we were doing with the Initiative on Cities. It was really great, and I know a couple of colleagues here helped me run this workshop, so I thank them for that. And it was a lot of work, so it's not, you know, and it's not money that, you know, is going to go to support any graduate student. It's just running a workshop. But it put BU in such a great light because we ran actually 2 of these, one here at BU and then one in DC. And there were so many program officers from so many different agencies that NSF invited because they wanted to share the feedback from the community to these agencies. So I think there are many ways you can actually be in control also of engaging the program officers.
I just wanted to build on something Naomi said about, you know, making sure you stay in touch. It's a long-term relationship, and that's something that I've seen Ozzer do very well. Is that when he has a new paper that comes out or something happened in some other realm of his work, he will connect it to someone else who doesn't know about it at NSF or a different agency or someone he's met along the way. Just a FY, wanted to share, thanks, and just to, you know, stay in people's minds and thoughts. And I think that's been really effective from what I've viewed from the outside.
And actually making you aware of it too, which is important.
Yes. So we can help share it. So we're open now to questions from the audience.
And while you're thinking one, I will say to Jennifer's point, oftentimes you'll send in a lot of notes and you'll never get a response, but it's still having impact if you continue to reach out. I've had instances where I've reached out to the same person 4 or 5 times, not to say, did you see my last note, but with new information. And about the 6th time when they were ready to receive it, that's when they wrote back. And because I had sent all those other times, they knew I was working that all throughout that year period. So don't let the lack of response be necessarily a signal back, but also don't use it to then turn around and badger them because it might be they're reading it and just it isn't a time where they can, you know, react to that at that moment.
Gloria, did you want a microphone? Do we need to give you a microphone or?
Sure.
Good.
So Jennifer, sometimes I have the sense that especially junior faculty have the sense that they should be hands-off, arm's length from their program officer, and that's kind of like cheating to get in touch with the program officer. And it does seem to differ from agency to agency. So like NIH has kind of career program officers. People have had that same program officer for 20 years, right? And they develop, you keep talking about relationships, but then other agencies have rotators, right? So how does it differ across agencies? Are there differences, say, at NIH as opposed to NSF in terms of the attitude about having that relationship with the faculty over time? And do we encourage faculty differently depending upon where they're going to get funded from?
That's a great question.
No, I agree. And on the NIH front, as you said, the folks, many of them stay around for quite a while, and they appreciate, and it varies. I mean, Naomi referenced that there are sometimes some program officers who are very difficult to get a hold of, but I do think that the information gets through, and sometimes you can even, and we can help you navigate this, try and work, even go to above their head essentially, or and not calling them out, but saying, oh, hi, division director, perhaps you can help me identify the right person. And then if they forward your information to the program officer, it may get a better response. So that's sort of just a tactic. But yeah, so that's what I think that NIH has that advantage. And one thing I will note then about why that advantage is becoming more and more important at NIH is because as the, and despite the recent increases for NIH, the funding streams are still tight, pay lines are still low, and program officers are actually having more discretion over which projects get funded. So there's, unlike NSF, the peer review at NIH is entirely separate from the programmatic piece. And so they get all the, the reviewers determine the scores, and then there's a pay line for each institute. And in theory, everything that is at or below that pay line should get funded. But there's a new, it's not that new. NCI, Cancer Institute's been doing it well. Select pay is where the program officers can actually pluck out, as long as it's not too bad of a score, within reason, they can pluck out projects that meet the needs of their portfolio and that they are interested in. And the way that they learn about these projects is hearing from from you all, from the researchers. And so then they know that you actually are working to try and get your research to meet their needs. And so that's just, I just wanted to highlight that because I think there's still the distinct two sides of NIH. There's the Center for Scientific Review that takes all of the proposals and organizes them, sends them to the committees, and those scores happen, and anonymously, but then there's also the program officers who are paying close attention and know what they want, and now have this more authority because the concern is that really good stuff is not getting funded because the pay lines have been low.
And in my experience, a lot of program officers prefer to meet with early career faculty.
Oh, yeah.
They're the people who are really enthusiastic and energetic about their research. They'd rather meet with that than someone who's been trying for 20 years and hasn't got funded and maybe be, slightly angry. I think the rotator thing, specifically at NSF, is both good and bad. It means, you've got to keep going back and building those new relationships, but if you ever had a bad relationship, then it's only for a few years. So that's
well, the rotators actually at NSF, it's an interesting position because statistics will tell you that most of them actually don't go back to their faculty positions. They end up going to other, even more important agencies or roles within NSF. They can actually end up being permanent people there. So I find them actually to be very interesting because they are themselves thinking about what's next. And so that is a point I want to make. Going back to Gloria's question on junior faculty, you are right. And one thing I keep saying, you should call the program officer, not to complain that your project was not selected, to understand what happened on the panel. And you would be surprised at how helpful they are. They will tell you quite a bit. Of course, it's not their decision, it's a panel. But it becomes very helpful. And then you get to know a little bit how it works. And they ask you, well, come visit us, come serve on a panel. And then you learn how things happen. So I think that is not what you do when a paper gets rejected. So if it's rejected, you get the reviews and say, well, that's it. You can't call the program, program committee chair and say, well, why my paper was rejected. That doesn't happen. But for a grant, you can, especially with NSF.
And once again, I really want to echo what he said, which is I think that the best time for early career faculty is after you've tried at least once, or you've at least started to pick a target and done a lot of work and talked to some colleagues, one of the frustrations we do hear a lot is when folks don't avail themselves of the resources at their own university. So you might participate in a department that's very, very well funded from a specific program, and you show up as an early career faculty member, and you have very little information. And they're thinking, it was easier for you to come to DC than to walk 3 doors down and talk to your colleague about what this program does and doesn't fund and what our tricks of the road are and things like that. I also think that in mission agencies, going back to the Departments of Defense and DoD Health or Department of Energy, places like that, program manager relationships are crucial because they're less reliant on pure panel review. And they do run reviews, but they don't have to follow the order that the panel recommended in any real way. I mean, they have to be able to defend it, but you could be ranked 1 through 15, and they could pick projects 11, 12, 13, and 14. And as long as they can defend that, that's totally legitimate. So you're incentivized to develop those relationships at an early career phase and at a phase where they can still recognize you for special kinds of mechanisms like the Young Investigator Awards, the fellowships, the summer fellowships, things that an early career faculty member would be more likely to avail themselves of than a more senior faculty member.
And also on DARPA in particular, these program officers, they choose a set of things to fund, not, as you said, not just by ranking them, but by thinking about the portfolio. Like, right. I'm going to fund 5, which 5, right? So it could be actually that the bottom is going to get funded because it is the complement to what else they want to fund. So think about it as selecting a group of projects that together are the best in their portfolio that gives them the possibilities of success. So, and that's, by the way, another way to, when you write proposals, is it could well be that part of it gets selected, not the entire thing. And if you have a relationship with a program officer, they can actually say, well, I'm going to fund that piece, and because that's the piece that fits into the picture I want to paint for my program.
And I don't think I stressed enough how much NIH wants to fund early career investigators. They are under tremendous political pressure from Congress, who thinks they're not doing enough, and so they are coming up with all sorts of new categories and ways. For many years, they've had a special pool. Those who've not received their first R1 and within 10 years of their terminal degree can be considered amongst their peers, and there's a different pay line. And now they're having a new category, early established investigators who are at risk of losing their first award, who they worry will drop out of the system. And so I cannot stress, now with the additional $3 billion for NIH is going to be under immense scrutiny to show that a lot of that money is going to early stage investigators. So their reaching out is exactly what they want. They want to hear from you because they don't have necessarily the means to find out what's going on in an effective way in the community.
And then Gloria, just one more. Naomi mentioned this earlier, the science agencies, they want to fund the best science. And so that program officer actually does want to hear from someone, and they want to make sure their proposal is the best possible proposal that goes in. And then on the aspect of how agencies are different, the National Endowment for the Humanities, in fact, they would love to actually see your proposal in advance, and the program officer will talk with you about it and hand it back to you and give you ideas and suggestions. And they actually sometimes will put in their call, here's the deadline if you want feedback, and then here's the deadline to actually submit. So that's, part of their culture. Similarly, the Institute for Education Sciences, the Department of Education, has a very different culture, and they say once our solicitation is open, now I can no longer speak with you because we have an open solicitation, but I can talk to you before that or after that. And then I do want to build on Ozra's point about feedback. I think that's also an important communication skill for folks, is when you have, you didn't get a grant, to have a positive conversation with a program officer afterwards. And the faculty I've spoken to have found it tremendously helpful, which I find really remarkable. I mean, I don't have to compete for grants. I know it's a heart-rending experience. And so to be able to have that positive conversation is wonderful. I think it makes your science better, it makes your next proposal better. Other questions?
Them all.
I know. So if we don't have other questions, what I'm going to say is the panelists will be here and available for conversation. I want to end by thanking all of you. I didn't thank you when you came. My boss pointed that out. But I do want to thank you all for being here. We really enjoy getting the opportunity to meet you, and we'd like to chat with you afterwards, and we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks.